Today on Holdco Builders, I'm joined by Christa Glassburn, an operator and investor who knows how to take a traditional business and build something extraordinary out of it. She helped grow a company from around 50 to 20 million in revenue to over 200 million, scaling to 750 employees along the way. And what makes her story remarkable is that this wasn't a flashy tech startup in a big city. It was built through acquisitions and relentless execution in small town America, inside industries most investors completely overlook. Now, through Harbor Capital, she's applying those lessons again, finding, buying, and building companies that most people, again, don't even know exist. Thanks a lot for coming to the Holdco Builders podcast, Christa.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'd like to start right at the beginning, before the hundreds of employees and big numbers, big acquisitions. You have a fascinating background, so let's start with your story, please.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, my background is strange. People don't know how it links together, but it came together through a bunch of situations and circumstances. So I grew up in Michigan originally. My background is automotive. My family all worked for General Motors. That was what you did in Flint, Michigan. So knowing cars was a thing. Knowing manufacturing was just what I was going to go into. I went as a manufacturing engineer for undergrad, got my first job at General Motors at 18, and loved every part of being in a plant, in the manufacturing environment, getting my hands dirty. That was just always me. But when I came time, sort of graduated from school and worked a couple years as an engineer, I realized that I just wanted to see more. I wanted to understand what I was doing. And when you're part of a big company like GM, you make decisions all the time, but you might not see those actions for 5 to 7 years, right? The products you're working on are in development, or the product is going out in a high volume. So I needed to see something different and something non-automotive and non-Michigan. So I took myself, thankfully, through a lot of great recommendations out to Stanford Business School. It was an incredible experience. The first time someone, when I said I work for GM, said General Mills, I said, no, General Motors. It was the first time anyone had ever not known that from just instant. So I knew I was in the right place, loved my time there. Always planned to go back to General Motors, but there was a pull to give back, a pull to see more. So I joined the FBI, which sounds strange, but it was an incredible experience, great program. Worked with their chief human capital officer, who was a former British Petroleum executive, and really worked on director initiatives, but got to see a business. And you don't think of the FBI as a business, but it's 35,000 employees, a $7 billion budget. So the things they have for HR, for IT, for finance, they're the same as a big business, but I got to be, the assistant to one of the key executives instead of far down the line. So that was a really great way for me to learn. I spent 5 years working with some of the most mission-driven people, incredibly hardworking people, and people who did things like 40 years in manual payroll, right? So this idea that they didn't just rise up a ladder, they had that dedication. And that's going to come back later on in this story, because that's what I love so much about what we do here at Harbor and previously at PBE. So after 5 years, I felt a pull to operations, to small business, to getting back into things. So I joined a search fund that bought a company called Pyatt Boone Electronics in Tazewell, Virginia. And it was an incredible little business that did mining, communication technology, and government contracting for contract manufacturing. And so it was a really cool experience. I spent 13 years there, which we'll talk a lot about because that's how we grew everything. And then finally, the company's sort of been relocated to the UK. It's got manufacturing still in the US, and we still value that tremendously. But the customer base and things have moved. And so, my family was ready to move back to the US after a couple years abroad during COVID. And so now we've joined Harbor. And I know we'll talk about that, but it's just, I'm so excited about what we can impact with small businesses in Virginia.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for the overview. Maybe one question, like you mentioned in the FBI, there was a gentleman who used to be an executive in British Petroleum. What made those people going from those large companies to join FBI, for example?
Yeah, so there was a period of time, Director Mueller was responsible for the FBI. He was their director, and he had this feeling that he needed to pull sort of key business executives into the Bureau to modernize it, to get rid of some of the bureaucracy, to find ways to follow the rules and regulations. He was an incredibly apolitical person. And so he wanted these people to come from the outside to say, this is where you need to go so we can continue to attract the best talent going forward. The FBI was always thought of as the best talent in government work. It was accountants, it was lawyers. That's who went to work as agents in the FBI. And so he wanted that to continue. And so he brought Don Packham, who was a brilliant executive from BP, who brought an HR view of HR to government that didn't really exist at that time. It was really interesting. He brought a guy in as IT that was really a great tech leader who really modernized the tech world. In a time, tech in government, especially the FBI, is hard. The classifications are hard. You have to have really very secure systems. We moved to BlackBerries at that time, which sounds crazy, but there were no cell phones. There was no anything. And so he really made a change to the FBI in that time that was really great. And the program was called the Special Advisor Program, which he came up with a Harvard Business School grad who went out and hired top business school graduates and brought them in for 3 to 5 years. The idea was you came in, you worked there for a couple of years, you helped change things, and then you went back on with your corporate career.
Now, in your case, you were living in Europe and then you came back to US. And in what moment did you get the approach of joining a search fund? And what was the approach from those people to get the person like yourself with this background to join them?
Yeah, it's interesting. So it was September, the 10th anniversary is September 11, and I was in Philadelphia. And so it was a busy time, high risk time for the Bureau. And, I just had this pull. And so I was talking to Don, the chief human capital officer, and I said, I think I want to go do something. I think I want to be a chief operating officer, like in my mind. And he said, you should look for a small to medium-sized company that really is doing that because you'd be great at it. And so at the same time, a Stanford GSBer from a couple years after me had just bought a company in Virginia and was looking for an operations person and posted a job, which is basically the only job I ever applied for in my life. And he called me the next day and we talked for a couple of months and I joined the company. So kind of an interesting experience, had no connection with any of it, but it worked out.
What was the opportunity? Did you have to move to somewhere? And once you joined, what was your job? What were you building? And maybe you can share the first, let's go step by step. Maybe you can share the first year, how it all went.
Sure. Yeah, so my husband and I were living in D.C. at the time. Kind of temporarily in Philadelphia, but D.C. My husband worked for Lockheed, so we were strongly in the Northern Virginia market. The role was to move to Southwest Virginia. There's a lot of people who don't know you can drive 5 to 7 hours west in Virginia from DC and still be in Virginia. I mean, it is far out there. And so we went out at Labor Day weekend, saw the plant, met the people, and just instantly felt like we could do something here. So we moved there, sold our place, kind of moved to the middle of nowhere, as a lot of people call it, and joined this company of just under 200 people, 40-year company at that time. And, all of the employees were family members that had been there before. Everyone I met in the community had a family member who had been at Pyatt Boone before that. And so it was sort of one of these things where you kind of were walking into a community and knew that they were desperate to keep this plant there, to keep these people there. They cared about it. They cared about the industry. But also, this kind of scary thing was happening. This group had bought one of their foundational companies in their town. And they didn't know what a search fund was. I didn't really know that well at the time either. And we were funded by half private equity and half private investors. And so, people have heard private equity. And even at that time, even in small towns, that meant that they were going to close. It just, that's what they took from it. And so the first year was really about kind of settling the entire community down to the fact that we really intended to grow this in that community. We intended to be in the community. The challenge is that I joined them in October of 2011, and in February of 2012, the market February, March, the market on both sides of what we had just completely collapsed. So the U.S. mining market restricted, went down about 75%. We lost nearly all of our customers almost overnight. And at the same time, we were delivering night vision goggles to the Afghanistan war. And that went into, they sort of paused and stopped buying and stopped growing that conflict as well. And so all of a sudden, you're looking at a business that you've just joined to grow, and you're thinking, how do I keep these employees actually employed? So we had to make some really hard decisions. We had to look at our business and look at every cost and look at every profit. And we found out that as much as, 60% of the work in the business was government contracting, but that was a small amount, if anything, of our profit. The mining communications equipment was a smaller part, but much more profitable. And in the time, we just had to make those decisions. So we exited government contracting, then went to focus on acquiring businesses and mining. It was always the search fund CEO that I worked with, who was a great partner to me. It was their plan to acquire and grow internationally, grow the mining community. And so in a time that's the first year when everything's shrinking, we went out and made our first acquisition. And that was the start of that.
But what about you, the first year? What were maybe some of the things you had to learn, unlearn, and what was your role? Because you said there were some challenges immediately happening.
Yeah, it was. So, I had never been a chief operating officer. I had never gone through an acquisition before. My background was operations, was manufacturing. So that was easy. That was the piece, right? And I came from a government background, so understanding the government contracting and the language was okay. That came around. And, most of our investors were foreign and international, and so they couldn't even be part of the government contracting piece. They couldn't go into the rooms with that. So that was a strange culture that I had to figure out. And so then, for me, though, we started doing this acquisition, and it was all of these things that I had heard from business school but never been a part of. So what does due diligence mean? What does it mean that we're under a letter of intent now? What is an integration of this business going to look like? Now, we were lucky in the fact that our business was this small business in Australia. They had a great technology, and we were manufacturing and distributing their product in the US. So we were their largest customer. We were manufacturing it all. We knew how to build it. And they got acquired by someone who wanted to focus on services. So they wanted to get rid of the product side, and we wanted a new product, and we already knew how to build it. So it was an immediate, transfer of knowledge, create an international team, understand, currency, understand trying to get our team to understand how to travel. But yeah, it was a big change, and it was exciting. But again, there's this backwoods kind of side, which is like, they're just going to move it to Australia. Like the minute this thing comes up, and in small businesses, that rumor mill is incredible. And so constantly you're fighting are you going to close it and move it to where, right? You can't possibly want to keep it here.
And size-wise, if I'm correct, it was around 15-20 million and around 200 employees, right? Hey, a very quick pause from the podcast because I want to talk about today's sponsor, CapitalBat. And we are listening and talking to those very special operators, capital allocators. And what I've learned is the best investors I know, they are ruthlessly selective about what they own. And deal-by-deal investing gives you that level of control. You can evaluate each opportunity independently. You get to know the operators. You construct your own portfolio based on your thesis, not someone else's deployment schedule. And the challenge, it has always been sourcing quality opportunities in the lower middle market. And that's why CapitalBat exists, and that's what they solve. They curate searcher and independent sponsor acquisitions in the range of 5 to 20 million enterprise value. They do everything. They handle the vetting and bring you opportunities where you can invest only $25,000 per deal or more. So it's an infrastructure for investors who want to direct ownership in established businesses without needing institutional minimums. Accredited investors only. Go to capitalbat.com. I'll also put the link in the show notes. And now back to the show.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, and it was a really good business, and it was profitable, but it was stable. And the person that ran it before, she was an incredibly hard worker, and she ran a very tight ship. But she kind of knew it needed to change. She knew it needed to grow. It was sort of at that spot. And she was also older and knew she wasn't going to do it. And so she was the one that pushed the owners to sell to us and to kind of exit. And so, that's a testament to her seeing that and seeing where the market was going in a time that tried to protect the staff. And that's really, again, a small town thing. These owner founders, these folks who run these small businesses, they want the best for that, even if it's maybe not the best for them, right? Like, she could have stayed there for sure, and it would have made it through her next 5 or 10 years, but instead she pushed that.
Okay. And you also mentioned during this first year you had those challenges, but you also expanded by acquiring the first company. Maybe you can share the story of this.
Yeah.
And your involvement in this as well.
Sure. Yep. So it's helpful to think about sort of my CEO and myself. So we were incredibly different people. So he's a former investment banker from Australia. He's a lawyer. So he has that background. So he can do the due diligence. He's an incredible negotiator. He can do those things. But then it gets to okay, now what are we buying? Who are we buying? How do we do their HR? How do we do their operations, right? So he can take care of the finance, the integration, but then now we still have to make this product. And then the second piece is we want to grow it. So we want to keep Australian sales and grow Australian sales. We want to grow the US sales. And so that first year was my first year at PBE was, restricting. We cut, unfortunately, 70 employees from the business. We had to, because of what was going on. But what's interesting is that in that time, those employees there was an incredible attendance issue at the company when we acquired it. And so there were a lot of people who just didn't show up for work. And so there was a culture thing where we cut those people because we had to, but it actually improved efficiency and improved the loyalty and improved the culture at the company to say, we're really going to try to grow, and we want you on top of this, and we want you on board if you care. And so we did that. We acquired the business. We brought on they had about 20 employees in Australia. We stopped all of their manufacturing over there. And so, that reduced a little bit, but we kept their engineers and we kept their knowledge staff, and we just kept growing, which led us to our second acquisition in early 2013, which was to buy a similar product company, but who had a much more global footprint. So they were in Canada, in England, in South Africa, in Australia. And so all of a sudden we had a better product and another product, but we also now kept these sales teams in those countries. And so we had a much bigger footprint, but then we moved their manufacturing back to the US as well, which helped us to again prove to our small town group that we really want to grow this company here. We want to invest in the manufacturing. And that all of a sudden took us from, 15, 20 million to 35 million in sales and growing. And we added a lot of people and footprint and partners. A lot of our business is focused on distributors. When you're in mining, distributors are your keys because they can be in all the small little places around the world that mining happens. And so you need to prove to them that you're also now in this, right? So this is a culture of growing this team that you're all going to build behind. And that was what was so important with the first couple of years.
Yes, your partner in this firm had this investment banking background. he knew exactly like how it all works when you acquire a company. But what was new for you when doing those acquisitions, like especially post acquisition? And as I understand, you did so many of them. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the things that were new. So, you think about acquisitions, and now looking back, I think about all the things I could have done differently. But at that time, it was more about ensuring that your current business keeps going. Make sure that the distraction to the current business isn't there. So, how do you make sure that the current business is staying and growing and moving while you're integrating in? And and then secondly, how do you make sure that, I mean, there were just, I didn't fully understand working capital adjustments, for instance. So, he trained me on a lot of these different pieces. Why do those things matter? What I knew just from a gut feeling that you almost always can cut, and you should negotiate to cut 10% of the inventory that a company has. Because truth be told, it's whether it looks aged or not, it's aged. There's some reason it's there, and there's an efficiency there that you can get off the start. The second thing is you should look at your staff really, really difficultly. And you should have a plan of what are you going to cut before it happens, right? But you should know, what is your plan? Where do you think we need these people or not before you ever meet them? And that sounds terrible, but when you meet people, you find that most people are really good and you like them and you want them. And in small business acquisitions, you're going to have duplication. You need to have places that people can grow. So you can't just keep people in the same jobs forever, or they're going to look outside, right? So you have to be constantly thinking, how am I moving up my current team? Where am I gaining from acquisitions people that we don't have that have great skill sets that we can use? Where can my team grow up to? And I find it much more helpful to have a plan that says, right, we're going to end up cutting 5% of the staff that we're hiring, right? Or, whatever that is, almost right off the bat. It's going to be personal to them, because when you fire someone, it's always personal, or you let someone go. It should never be easy to remove someone. If it is, you're in the wrong job. But at the same point, if it's business, it's easier to say on day 1 through 2 weeks, and it's easier for them to go get another role than to drag it on. So I learned all those things through sort of mistakes. Through guidance, through, like I said, my former CEO had done a lot of acquisitions, and our investors were incredibly impressive business people, both our private equity investors and our private investors. And they really took a risk on specifically me, but they helped me and they trained me and they gave me guidance, and it really took off.
In total, how many companies did you acquire?
So we acquired 7 companies. In about, 11 years, I guess. So, the first about a year in, the second 2 years in, the third one about 4 years in. And then from that point, we took a little break. So we kind of planned our strategy going forward, decided, how were we going to move? Where did we want to go? It was also the time that the private equity business wanted to sell. It was in their sort of sell window. And so our investors stepped in, bought out the private equity, exited the private equity, which, is a challenge in itself with businesses. When you're private equity owned, there's this really strange environment that happens at the time when the exit happens. And people again wonder, what is it? Where does it go? What's going to happen? And so we did that. So we were 3 acquisitions in, and then we sort of not changed industries, but changed industry focus. So we had bought and consolidated this really great mining safety communication system. We had a really great global footprint. We were really involved with most of the major mining companies. And now it became, how do you keep growing? And a company came up, and again, because of his background, he had been talking to these companies for years. If you ever come up for sale, if you ever think about you want to sell, let us know. And that was really PBE's thing, is most of our acquisitions came before the brokers got involved, before the sort of they were for sale and desperate kind of thing. And so we made an acquisition to a company in Australia. That was our fourth one. That brought us into the power market. So now we're communications and power, which, if you think about a construction site, you sort of have to have power before you can have communications, before you can build anything. And so it made sense. It got us in earlier with the purchasing agents at the big companies, created a lot of sort of synergies between our salespeople and their contacts. The mining industry is incredibly small, even though it's large. You run into the same people who move within the same companies. And so for us, that was our way of growing. We did that. That was also our foray into the Asian markets. They had a Singapore and Malaysia facility. And so that got us more into Asia where, as a communications company, you would have assumed we were, really tied into the Chinese technology market. And we really weren't. We got some chips from there, but we did a lot of work around making sure that we weren't tied to that. And that was early on.
Now, when it comes to your own role, again, under PE ownership, and then post-PE ownership, how did it change? Did it change?
Yeah, not really. Not really. So the CEO had much more relationship with the private equity team, other than me I joined the board when the PE left. So that was change for me. For me, the way we looked at the business was it was sort of like acquisition, investor, finance was the CEO and a good connection to the sales team. And then I was everything else, right? So manufacturing, HR, supply chain, engineering. And so it really just completely split. And so when private equity left and then we had our full ownership of the company, it didn't really change much other than I got to now join the board. And so I got to learn more about how they were thinking. And again, just more about how the investors thought about the business and the global business.
Now, again, under PE ownership, you were focusing on mining industry, the products for this mining industry. And this is oftentimes, we've discussed before, like small town America and those hidden businesses, which not too many people know about. Where all those acquisitions, the companies you bought, were they also based in those small towns? Because I used to live in Australia myself, and mining, it's in Perth, and it's almost like in the middle of nowhere. So how were the acquisitions and the companies, where were they based mostly?
Yeah. So all of our acquisitions after the initial were international, but they were in small towns outside of large towns. And it's an interesting thing. I mean, so the first one was outside of Toronto. The second one was in Newcastle, so a couple hours north of Sydney. Yeah, the first one was in Australia, in Melbourne. The second was in Canada. The third, outside of Toronto. The third one was an English-based company. And so you sort of, but outside of the city. They were never in major cities. They were 2 hours out, an hour and a half out. And that's a trend. I find that most investments want to happen within a sort of 60-minute circle of a major city. And when you can just get out where it's too far for some people to go, you find these incredible founder-owner based businesses where they don't actually have any idea how to sell their business. And also they don't trust that someone could care enough about the business to care about their people. And they hear the negatives of selling their business, and they also want to live in that town after. There's a lot of people who, when you sell, you don't want to drive past the facility and see it shut down. It's not a thing you want to do, right? You don't want to drive by or open your newspaper and see that they cut those people that you worked with. And so, that's a culture thing which creates opportunity for us. It creates the ability for us to get great businesses, profitable businesses at really great margins, great multiples. But it also comes with the responsibility factor of making sure that you're going to honor that person and that team as they go. And that creates a different business environment. It's not better, not worse, probably, but it's different. The culture is different, and it's what I love about it.
Hey, one more quick pause from the show because I want to talk about our sponsor number 2, which is Spacebar Studios and their insane offer, which they are currently running. 35,000 new newsletter subscribers in 90 days for your business, or you don't pay. There are no setup fees, no retainers, but there are 2 spots available in January. So, what to do is go to a page, spacebarstudios.co. I'll also put the link in a description where you can find it. Book a call, have this free conversation with them, discuss ideas, ask questions, and maybe this could be a right partnership for your business. So spacebarstudios.co. I'll also put the link in the description. And now back to the show. Before we talk about the opportunity, the businesses in the small town America, in the middle of nowhere, as you've said many times, because you're the person who you've seen this, and you've said many times that the PE firms in a large towns, they don't even know what is going on in a places like this. Before we move into this, how did this journey end for you? Like, did you sell the company, the acquisitions you made? How did it all end? And then let's move forward.
Yeah. So no, company's still doing well, growing. In the middle of COVID, we did 2 acquisitions. One that was a business that we had been talking to, which was a communications business for years. It went into administration during COVID, and we had about 10 days to decide to buy it, and bought it. It was an English-based company. And at the same time, we bought a company that we had been in business or talking to for almost a year and a half, which was up in Leeds, which, a couple hours north of London. And so that got us into data centers. Again, power, but power generation with generators and that kind of issue. And then communication. So at that time, my family moved to England. We spent a couple years in England. COVID in a foreign country, it was a challenge. Doing 2 acquisitions in the middle of a pandemic, super challenge. And so, but it went well. The company's doing great. In sort of 2023, I had my second child, and living in England just became a thing where we wanted to be by our family. So I gave some notice, spent about 9 months finding the right next person with the board and with the management team. And I think they've got a great thing going. I was excited to watch them, and I'm excited to continue to watch them grow. But at the same point, I think it was good for me to step back, start to see what else was out there. You get very comfortable, not comfortable in not working. I worked 1 million hours and tried to push everything I could. But sometimes I think you need a break from it just to sort of see the woods from the trees. And so I took this break over sort of Christmas 2024, early 25. And I was trying to figure out what to do. And through a whole bunch of suppliers, owners, different people, they said, this thing is happening in Virginia. You should be part of it. And they're funding it. And we have this great group of investors who came together for myself and my CEO. And now we have a third partner. And we're now just going after small businesses again with the idea that we're going to be a permanent holding company. We're going to give annual dividends to investors, but they're profitable businesses that we want to give, 30 years more to. So they're typically owner-founder businesses. They don't have succession plans, or they have a good management team, but maybe, the management team's not going to buy the business. The owner wants an exit. And so that's what's been great. We've been really, excited about the 3 targets we have now that'll close in Q1. They're all very different foundational businesses. But basically, our goal is now to keep the headquarters, keep the talent in the small towns. And if we acquire businesses, just like we did at PBE, we acquired global businesses, but we kept the focus on these smaller towns and making sure that we're creating community around them.
Now, let's talk about the small town opportunity, because we had this intro call with you and have a bunch of notes from this. I'm mentioning 3. There are a lot of wonderful people in those small towns. I also have a note that people from the big towns aren't willing to travel. And as you mentioned before as well, the owners, the business owners, they don't know PE or investment banking. So these are the three notes. Maybe you can share the stories of what did you see when it comes to those very small cities where a lot of those exceptional businesses are based.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting. So a traditional investor might look at the business and think it's not that exciting, right? So it's far away from a main town. How are you going to grow it? Do they have a very specific product that I'm going to blow up to be this gigantic company? Or maybe they only have a regional connection. They do a service that is more regional in nature. And so, but, they're small, profitable businesses with people who are very hardworking, because we're not competing with private equity or other investors. We can pay a really fair multiple, and we don't have to flip the business in a couple years, right? So you don't have to get this very quick return. You can get a longer return where you can pay your investors back on dividends. You can help them and then you can really focus on how you're going to build these companies. And honestly, it's not that private equity in any way is bad or better or worse. It's simply that there's a different model there. And a lot of holding companies know that if you can hold, you can also create a lot of scales of economy, right? So for us, we're hoping to create an environment around these companies in Virginia where people know that there's another option to sell to. They know that we want them to stay involved. So this isn't we want to sign you for a 2-year contract and then walk you out the door after 6 months and we're going to change everything. This is like we don't know about your business. We need you to continue being here, but we're going to back you and we're going to be involved and we're going to bring the right people in. The second thing is that these small towns have a flight of young talent leaving them. These people who run these businesses, their kids go to the great universities around our country, and then they don't come back because there aren't jobs to come back to. And so they go to the big towns, which is great for them, and we're happy. But the family structure of that pulls these people away from these towns. And so the challenge with that is it pulls them away from jobs like school boards. It pulls them away from being coaches in the schools. And so you really impact these things. Then you impact your hospital sizes and your, everything else that's around it. And so for us, if we can create this environment where you do have places to come back, and also, as you're growing in small companies, a lot of times talent doesn't have anywhere to go. There's already a CFO. So I've gotten to be a great accountant and a great finance person, but I'm not going to be a CFO in this business because you're not going to leave for the next 15 years. So can we at Harbor then create those environments where we take that great accountant from there and we move them to another one of our companies that needs a great accountant? Can we also do internships where we bring these families' children in as interns in a couple of our different businesses where they can see that this exists? If you can do that, you can bring wealth back into these small towns that can then just keep creating these small businesses. Because, lots of businesses need to be big and they need to be the General Motors of the world, and that's great. And, that's my background and I love it. But we need these small businesses to employ our communities. And so that's what's important. The second thing I would say is that, they always say A players hire A players. And, that's just a thing. In these small towns, oftentimes you get the B players who will work as hard and harder. And if you can guide them, they can achieve incredible things. The challenge is if you're on a short timeline and, you've got just your set integration list you do and your set turnaround plan you do, you don't have time for that. Whereas we do have time for that. And so that's the difference in the model and why I'm excited about it.
Let's say there's someone listening, whether they're a searcher or independent sponsor, they're living in let's say a big town, but they listen to this episode and they're like, okay, I really like this idea of moving into a very small town, buying a business there, obviously with an investor involved. So the question for you, based on your experience, how do people find those deals? Because oftentimes, as we talked in the intro calls as well, you can't find those companies. They don't have a website. They don't. The owner is just busy doing their stuff. They're not on Twitter, X. They never have a podcast. They're not on YouTube. They're just doing things. And again, as I said, they don't even have a website. So if someone listening got excited, what would you tell them to do?
Yeah, it's difficult. It's hard to find those companies, but what I would say is start in your community. Start in the community that's 30 minutes from you. Now, if you're in New York City, that's a challenge, right? Things are big from ever. But, and for instance, in Charlotte, you drive 45 minutes, you're in a rural community in Charlotte, right? And the way I find these businesses is through relationships, through communication, through, really honestly driving through areas, getting people, we have meetings with owners who might decide not to sell, and that's okay. We're here for them 5 years from now, right? Maybe they're not quite there, but they want to think about it as their succession plan. If they trust us and they see that we're honest about what we're doing and we're honest about our communications, they've got other friends who have built these other things, or suppliers or customers of theirs. And that's where we're getting our deal flow from. Brokers are incredible. They're helpful. They have a lot of opportunities. But when it comes through a broker, you end up with competition as well. And a lot of the businesses that we're buying weren't originally for sale. We're talking to them about their thinking about what their future is. We're talking to them about what we could do together. And they feel that like maybe this is a good idea, right? So for that investor who's thinking about that, I would suggest that it's just like job searching. It's going to be, continuous slog for a long time. And, search funds were newer in 2011. They're not really new now. But what people say about it is that, it takes a couple of years to find the right business. And so, don't kind of quit your job and go crazy off the bat, right? Really start feeling out and knowing not only can you find the right business, but what are you going to do with it? What's your story on what you're going to do with it? Because it's not about just coming in and being an absentee person. This isn't an absentee market. We are buying businesses that want us to be involved, and we want to be involved. They could sell to absentee. They could find investors. They're profitable businesses. They could go take debt and grow if they wanted to. So it's that weird middle ground, but I would suggest it just comes from talking a lot.
Now, to give listeners a bit of overview of the opportunity there, last time you said that 4,000 people in a town, out of which 200 work for one company. And when it comes to those companies, there is this one huge customer and many smaller ones. And zero export for those businesses. If you can solve this, there is a huge opportunity. And another interesting thing you said about the people is 200 people working for a manufacturing firm, but only one has a passport, so they don't travel. So what else have you seen? Or maybe you can share some of those stories, because this shows, and this is screaming good of an opportunity.
Yeah. No, it is. And, I think there's two things there. So yeah, the first one is sort of this idea of no passports, not understanding export, not understanding, it could be that you sell and you built a business because you saw a hole in the market, right? Whether it was, there wasn't a local machine shop, so you got a couple CNCs and you started machining in your backyard, and then it grew and your customer grew, or you got a good customer and you build this big business, right? And so typically that's what it starts with. There's a big manufacturer somewhere nearby. You did one thing, maybe you worked for them, your family worked for them, something happened, there was a relationship. And so then you got some other small jobs, but you didn't know how to go find those big manufacturers and talk to them about also what you do. Most of these companies don't have sales teams. The CEO is the salesperson, right? They're also the pricer of any project that comes in. And so explaining to them, the idea of, well, okay, let's bring a business development person in. Let's bring somebody who can knock down a bunch of doors, get you conversations. And instead of that taking you 2 weeks of your time, you've got 4 meetings set up today, right? I'm not trying to take away the meetings that you're going to have with these people and how you're going to price it, because that's what's important about your business. But let's help you find that. Finance as well. The challenge with these businesses is they're not typically, accounting and finance is not done for, any kind of accounting principles or GAAP or any of those things. They're typically done for tax accounting, right? They're small businesses. It's just, how do I minimize paying a lot of tax this year? Which is very unlike an investor business coming in to look at your financials, right? And then the third thing is, an export. An export could be domestic to regional to national as well. How do you grow? Truth be told, if you're a small machine shop, maybe you see, or one of these other companies we have that we're working on, they see their region as within an hour of them because they think they can drive their truck an hour away and come back. Maybe you don't have to drive the truck. Let's hire someone to drive the truck. Or is there another company a couple hours out that we could also buy where now we're both doing the same thing and they've got their hour, right? And then international, the way we did that was bringing people from those countries to the plant, letting them see and talk to and explain that, but then also taking people with us when we traveled. The number of times when I went to a meeting in Australia or Canada or Singapore or England that I took someone from our team with us. Now, we weren't extravagant travelers. We didn't travel business class. We didn't stay in the most expensive places. So this wasn't, an incredibly costly thing. But getting someone a passport, taking them with you, booking their flights, booking their hotel, showing them how to go around in another country, all of a sudden that country isn't so foreign anymore. And when they're talking to their counterpart in that country, it's not another world away. And you just have to kind of create this small town feel amongst a global world, make it feel smaller. And for us, that was always a challenge. Our service team traveled all over the world. And the way they like to do it is that they brought postcards back from everywhere they went and they put them on the wall. Our sales team put a big map out and started poking pins in the global where we sold product. Where was PB's product? Where were our distributors? Where were they distributing product to? And all of a sudden, the world wasn't so big.
Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the Harbor Capital. You already said targeting 3 companies, hoping to close in Q1. A little bit about the investment philosophy as you've been raising capital. One of the things you've said, investors want to feel like investors. What it means?
Yeah, so we started with the idea that maybe we would raise capital for every acquisition we did. Maybe we would be different. We wouldn't have a fund. We'd just, and the challenge was we ended up with 3 at the same time. And so now, we're raising our first fund. It's been really well subscribed. People are coming in. They like the mission. But yeah, I think the investment thesis of it is that they know what they're buying and are also regional investors. So a lot of our investors are coming from Virginia. They know Lynchburg versus Roanoke versus, Wytheville. They know where these things might be and they could drive by them. The same thing is that I'm amazed to see how small Virginia is when it's huge geographically. The people know each other. There's, I went to school with someone that was from Tazewell. I call them and then they connect me to this person. So almost every business we find, before we talk very much, we found out from 5 different people that they already know that we talked to so-and-so over here, right? Now that's a competitive challenge because when people think a business is for sale, then competition happens. But we're finding that investors really like the idea. Investing right now is very nameless and faceless, right? It's stocks and mutual funds. And so you've got your money in something, you don't really know what it's doing. Whereas they're passive investors. They have no action at all in what we're buying, but they can understand it. It's something that they can feel. It's something that they can feel proud about. They might be able to talk to their kids about how they're investing in something that maybe their kids could work at someday or their grandkids could work at. And when you start to put a product and a face around these buildings that people pass by, the community feel comes in. And it seems cheesy. And ultimately, if it wasn't a good business idea and we weren't making money, we wouldn't, it wouldn't be viable. So there's a good business side to this but it might not be, 100 pennies out of 100 pennies you can get. It might be 98, but at the same way, it's really powerful in a lot of other ways.
Now, when it comes to making money and capital allocation, and when you compare your previous business where you bought those mining businesses and the opportunity you're pursuing now, how similar or different is the investor view when it comes to capital allocation? I mean, you mentioned something that you're gonna pay yearly dividends, where previously you just kept buying more businesses. What is the expectations from the investor side? Do they want to have this yearly cash flow for their investment, or they're very happy if you just keep compounding their capital by just where there's some free cash on the accounts, you just go and buy more businesses, or they prefer if you pay dividends?
Yeah. So initially, right, PBE had this group of investors, and their goal was just to make the best, most profitable, biggest company that we could, right? So that was always a long-term plan in building that company. The challenge with what we're doing here is that we want people to want to build a whole bunch of different businesses. And so there's a piece of, we want them to feel an instantaneous return. I think, the truth is for our investors in this is that we wanted a different model. We wanted them to put some money in, invest in a couple companies, sort of have this proof that there was deal flow, because there were a lot of people that said, how are you going to find these companies, right? It's the whole point of this podcast. How do you find these small, profitable businesses that are willing to sell to you? And so, we wanted to prove that. We wanted to prove that we could make returns. These businesses are profitable, but why do these people want to sell to us? What do we bring them as owners? So yeah, the investment thesis is different. So our goal is to return the capital as quickly to 5 years from the point that we raised it as possible. Now, some of that's going to be easier than others, right? Some of them, each business is going to have a different acquisition structure. So for us, one of them is going to be really heavy acquisition wise. We have a plan to call capital 3 times in the first 5 years to acquire 6 businesses. Now, these are small, 3 to 4 to 5 person small businesses located in regional areas where we can grow market share, right? So they're not flashy, they're not exciting, but in the end, if you've gone from $1 million EBITDA to 4 million EBITDA because you've bought 6 sort of 500K type businesses, and you've got a great manager in the business that we're buying who's run big businesses before and can grow and scale, that's exciting for us. And so that will return dividends slower. It will still return every year, but slower than one of our other businesses, which is already incredibly profitable. We think we can make that more profitable, and they don't have an exit strategy and they don't want to close it. They want us to keep it. So they're going to stay with us and we're going to help grow it. But we now get the benefits from the capital that we raise and the profits that we make. I think that, the other thing in this is that because of the mission of Harbor, there's a lot more seller financing and earnout capability than in some deals, right? So most of the time when you see a broker deal, it's a lump sum purchase. Maybe it's got an employment contract with an extra little earnout or something with it. Our deals can be whatever we think it's meant to be. We're not stuck within a box. And so we really talk to the owner about what they want, right? So do they want to be part of it? Is it better for them to get all the cash now? Do they need the cash now? Do they just want to know that the cash is coming over the next couple of years? So if something happened to them in the future, that their families don't have to deal with trying to sell it or close it. And those motivations can really drive some unique financing options where maybe we don't have to call or raise as much capital, or we don't have to take debt to buy out a building because we can buy it from them over 10 years, right? And that really creates a different thing. So what I would say is, back to your question a while ago about these smaller investors who think this might be a good idea. I might do this. You got to be flexible on those pieces, and you're going to need to be, because you're probably not going to have all the money there to just slap it down and do that, right? So for us, the max we can do with our capital that we raise initially, that's just going to help us. Now, once we've bought that business, do we want to fund acquisitions and fund growth internally? Sure. as long as we can give back to our investors and help them, then we're going to always be frugal in the fact that we want to keep growing that business. It's only better for our investors. They own a bigger, a part of a bigger thing. It's better for those businesses because they're going to employ more people in the community. And then it's better for our holding company and the idea that we can now have more impact to buy more businesses and also to create that intrinsic value. Shared services is still a thing. Can we share HR and finance and IT services? As you grow, you can. In America, health insurance and health benefits is a huge part of everybody's P&L. Different in other countries, but for us, that's a huge part. And the more people you can have under that umbrella, the more cost effective you can have. Small companies are incredibly penalized on that. Until you get to 100 to 150 employees, you're just paying a ridiculous amount of money for risk management, right? It's just hard for our businesses in this country to succeed with that.
Christa, I'm very happy that you decided that you first said yes, and that you decided to come and share your very special story with the world. I think now we got to end the part 1, and in 1 year from now we will do part 2, hopefully, where you share the stories with your current business, the companies you're buying and what you're building. So the very last question, as you've experienced a lot, worked with so many different people, achieved some remarkable things, what's the best investment advice you've ever received?
There's 2. So when I was first starting my first job, my grandfather said to me, in the US, we have these 401ks, investment accounts, and businesses match investment. And my grandfather at that time said, whatever a company will give you for free, take it. And so from an early age, when I was definitely not thinking about retirement, it was like, if you invest 3%, they'll give you 3%. Take it. That's been the foundation of me being able to have flexibility now in this age bracket to take that break from PBE, to think about doing something individual and unique. From an investment perspective, the major one, and it's commonly said, but it's true, when other people stop is your time to go buy. And it shows at PBE when we bought at the downturn. It shows now in a really strange environment with tariffs and post-COVID, structures, to go and do this and to find those environments. So for me, when times are tough, it creates opportunity, but you have to be very careful of your risk, right? Don't be crazy. Do small things, but small things can become big.
That's perfect. Again, thanks a lot for doing this, and best of luck with the deals.
Hey, thank you. I look forward to celebrating our success in a year.